Greetings, fellow Mandalorians, and welcome to episode 106 of the Sons of Mandalore podcast. My name is Brian, also known as Kr0ozin, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Justin, or Jimmydehand. How you doing tonight, Justin?
Doing great. I'm very excited to talk to our first guest here. He's my hero for taking his deck to Gen Con.
Yeah, this is the first guest we've ever had on the show, so we're really excited, and it couldn't be better themed. When I was at Gen Con and I saw that somebody brought Mandalorian Supercommandos and ended up making it to the finals, I was like, I have to get this guy on our show. It would just be a crime not to have him on a show called The Sons of Mandalore. So we are joined tonight by the one and only Jordan, who like I said, came into the finals at Gen Con this past weekend. How are you doing, Jordan?
Great. Glad to be here, guys. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be the first guest. I did not know that was the case.
Yeah,
It's a lot of pressure.
No, if anything, that's the easiest role. Then now you're setting the bar for everyone else. That's pretty much what it is. You don't have to.
I'm going to set it real low, so anyone that follows should be thankful to me.
So
we set it low enough on our own.
That's a great point. Yeah. So you don't have much to worry about. So, but yeah, thanks a lot for coming on. We really appreciate it. I'm excited to talk to you because there's a lot of interesting things that went on at Gen Con. The tournament itself was super interesting. A lot of variety of decks showed up, and kind of want to just talk to you about your experience and all that kind of thing. So we're gonna jump in that a little bit of a second. Before we get there, I have a couple logistical things I want to get out of the way. So first, I want to start off by thanking, of course, our Patreons over at patreon.com/Sons of Mandalore. Without you guys, you make it possible to do what we do. And I want to give a specific shout out to our two new patrons this week, Matt R. and Mike E. Thanks you very much, guys, for signing up. It really means a lot to us. And on that note, I wanted to point out that we have the Mandalorian Supercommando alt art. We are just finishing up, and we'll be sending that to the printer in about a week or two. So be on the lookout for those coming soon. Those will go out to our patrons very soon. And we're also Justin and I are going to start finally recording and posting the exclusive Patreon only videos that I mentioned on our page. It's something we've been needing to do for a while, and we have plans to do it within the next week, so keep an eye out for those as well. And one last thing, of course, if you have listened to the last couple episodes, you know we're doing a giveaway for two 3D custom-made battlefields, Main Plaza and Comms Tower. If you are interested in entering that, the instructions are on our Facebook page, so just go check out the post there. You can see some pictures of them as well. And I'll be doing the drawing for that sometime later Friday afternoon, probably around 5 o'clock-ish Central Standard Time. So be on the lookout for those, and we'll announce the winners on Friday. All right, with that all out of the way, let's jump into the episode. As I mentioned, we got Jordan here with us, who brought Mother Talzin and two Mandalorian Supercommandos to North American Championships at Gen Con. Justin and I have dubbed the deck Mama Mandos, but I don't know. You got the deck, so you kind of get to choose the name. Do you have a name you've been calling it?
I joke with my friends about this all the time. I actually really dislike naming decks because it seems just the name abbreviation seems so easy to use for Destiny. Like Yoda Leia, Yoda Cassian, sure. Whatever. So I just generally call it Talzin Commandos. We decided that if I had to name it, we were going to do some sort of abbreviation like Rayla. So I was going to take the TA from Talzin and the CO from Commandos. We're going to call it Tacos. So like that catches on.
Tacos is amazing.
That catches on, fantastic. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm just going to call it Talzin Commandos.
That's fine. I do the same thing. I name them all by just the characters in it because it makes it so much easier to find it when I'm going through my list of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I like tacos. I think that's a thing that should start sticking. I'm on board. So yeah, first off, huge congrats. Obviously, you had a great performance this past weekend, making the finals. So I just wanted to start before we get into the tournament itself with a couple kind of basic questions. So first, how did you find Destiny? How'd you get into the game? Do you have any experience with FFG games or CCGs beforehand? What's your how did you get into Destiny when you first got started?
Sure. So I started with Netrunner probably around 2015. I was just looking for a card game. Didn't want to spend all the money into Magic at the time, so LCG seemed like a good model. after about a year playing that, I got introduced. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Warhammer Conquest, which is another FFG game.
Sure. Yep.
And that captured my attention for a long time. That was when I went to my first regional, all my store champs, first Gen Con. And I had a blast with that game. And that to date remains my favorite game. But they lost the license for that game.
Yep.
And I knew that L5R was going to be the next LCG. So I actually had a little bit of downtime in between. And Destiny was popping out right around then. So Destiny originally for me was meant as kind of a time killer between the end of Conquest and the beginning of L5R. I ended up really liking the game. L5R launched. I sold out sometime during Spirit of Rebellion, during the POMAZ heyday. And the L5R community around here died really rapidly, and I wanted to get back into a game, and the Destiny community was still going strong, so I hopped back in around Legacies, and then I've just been playing since then.
Oh, nice. That's a shame. That's a game Justin and I have been talking about trying out for a while. I think it's really cool what they're doing with the OP for L5R, how it kind of moves and adjusts based on who wins the big events and stuff. That's a neat kind of format. But I don't think we have a really big L5R community here either. But
no, ours is, we had 10 people coming out early on, and then it dropped down to around 3. And the great thing about the game is if it's one of those games where if you're more experienced and significantly better than your opponent, you'll win every game almost. So it really rewards the time that you put in. But on the flip side, that makes it really difficult to build a community around, because when people are just starting and they're playing people that have played the game for a while, the game can feel really unbalanced. It really disincentivizes people to keep coming out. So it kind of kills the community on its own a little bit. So you get a bunch of diehards, which makes for some great games, but it's tough to sustain a community like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's actually one of the things I like about Destiny is the dice and the variance that adds. Like, another reason I like Hearthstone as well, for an example, is that a lot of the skill in the game is kind of managing that variance, but at the same time, that also gives anybody a chance to win any game, which I think is healthy for a game that attracts everyone from casual to super competitive.
Absolutely, and it's not that Destiny doesn't require skill or that there's not big payoffs for all that dedication. But like you said, I can go to a local Friday night meeting, have someone show up, give them a deck, and they can do things that feel productive for them, make it feel like they're participating in the game instead of just getting slammed round after round.
Yep.
And that encourages them to come out more, participate more, and that's how you build that community.
Yep, totally agree.
We have talks all the time about how to nurture and cultivate, and I mean it's like you can't come on too strong, but you can't play it too soft. You have to like set up the proper type of event and the proper type of decks to teach with. And,
absolutely. I think every community has like one or two token people that is what they excel at, being that bridge for new people into like the competitive scene or just the experienced players. I'm personally not one of those players. It's hard for me to kind of like let off the throttle when I'm playing games.
Yeah.
I definitely like to just play competitive all the time. But we have a great guy, Ryan, locally, that's kept the community. I think we got down to just a handful of people, and he was still coming out and playing. And now we're up to 12 regularly every week, and sometimes we get 18 just on like a local Friday night.
Yeah, we call that clubbing baby seals around here. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a couple players like that at one point that kind of went a little overboard and scared some people out of our local meta, but we've been kind of nurturing it. But we're getting there.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't feel like I'm that intimidating when I play against other people, but it's just in my mind, I want to keep going fast.
Right. There's a difference between playing to win and just kind of being a jerk about it. And there are people who don't know how to walk that line. So it's nice when you have someone in your area that can kind of nurture those new players and get them into the game.
Yeah, our community as a group is just amazing. Everyone's super friendly all the time. It's honestly what keeps me in the game, because as far as games go, there's probably more. There's games where I prefer the systems over Destiny.
Sure.
Just from a purely gameplay standpoint. But there's nothing like the community that we have locally, and that's just what keeps me going week after week.
So tell us a little more about the community. So you say you're from Grand Rapids, Michigan area.
That's correct.
I've seen a lot of stuff on the Discords. Michigan has a good representation of Destiny up there. I've seen you guys have a ton of store championships. Your regionals drawing a buttload of people. Like, well, what's the community like up there? Is it?
It's interesting. I think there's a lot of. I know the Detroit side is pretty big. We have a few areas in the surrounding Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, which is about an hour away, and I think there's some Battle Creek. So there's these smaller hubs. I'd say that Grand Rapids and Detroit are probably the largest. But the state, the state's only a couple hours wide. So whenever you have those events, it's easy for one group to travel to the other side of the state. And then at least Grand Rapids in the West Michigan area, you can draw from Indiana, Chicago, all those Midwest states, which for whatever reason, and I don't know why, they typically tend to be like high FFG participation games. So we can churn out a lot of people for events, which is nice. And this year, I think we've had 4 or 5 store champs that have been within an hour drive of Grand Rapids, or maybe hour and a half.
That's gonna
Nice. Yeah.
Jealous.
Kr0ozin and I, like we had our one local, and every other tournament has been at least minimum 2-hour drive for us.
Yeah, that's 2 hours isn't too bad, but much beyond that it gets dicey, and you don't know how many people are going to turn out. Like if it's only the one, I've ironically only been able to go to one so far, despite how many have been close to me, and we only had 8 players, and it was just Swiss rounds and then no cut, so it almost wasn't even worth the drive at that point. Because if you're going to dedicate all that time, I want to play a lot of rounds.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you don't want to travel an hour to play 3 games and go home.
Yeah, quick funny story about non-Destiny game. I mentioned Conquest earlier, and my first regional I ever went to was out in Wisconsin, which is probably about a 4.5-hour drive for us. And we show up, and there's only 4 people there, me and my buddy I came with, and then the 2 other guys.
Oh, no.
So we played a 2-round regional. And,
oh God! And it took
which
8
I
hours
won.
of travel to do that.
Yeah, which I won.
Nice.
So I got some sweet prizes, but it was kind of goofy to travel that far for just 4 people.
That's a shame.
Yeah, you see, you could have just like asked the shop owner. It's like, we'll pay you X amount of money, just send us the kit, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was the worst part of it. They had this stack of 64 alt art prize cards, and they tried to give 1 to each of us. When a play set was 3, I was like, "Come on, man, just give us the play set. Right? There's only 4 of us here. What are you gonna do with the other 52 cards?"
Yeah. So back to the tournament aspect. I know Kr0ozin and I, we have like a little bit of a crew that we have locally that whenever a big tournament or a big event's coming up, we tend to run a gauntlet. I won't say, gauntlet, I guess is a word for it, but just one person will say, okay, I really need to practice against this deck, and this deck. We'll build those decks and play them against him, or give him the deck and we'll trade decks, and I'll play his deck against, like, for instance, Kr0ozin ran Cassian Poe at Gen Con. So, he might play. Yeah.
yeah, we actually played in the knockout round.
Yeah, he knocked me out of the day 2.
Oh, well.
It was kind of ironic, but losing to Mandalorians to keep me on a day 2 I was joking with Jedi Geek Girl on Twitter about it, and I was like, I guess there's no better way to go out than by my own kind.
Yeah,
that just seems fitting.
But the reason I bring it up is, do you have a crew like that in your meta? Is there like the more, like, I guess, dedicated competitive players that practice like that and prep?
Yeah, I think the problem is we have the players that would totally be up for it, and we have guys that bring a lot of meta decks, or at least have a lot on hand. And the problem, at least for me, I would say this actually just applies to most people in our group, is we just don't know what we want to play until the event's only a handful of days out.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
2 weeks before, I think I was playing Plo Padawans for fun. I was playing Yoda Leia Mill. I had the Launch Bay OTK deck out. And then
Thank you for not bringing that, by the way.
yeah. So I tested that out. And then the week before, I was like, all right, this is the first tournament I'm ever going to have at least like 5 days lead time on what I'm going to pick. And so I sleeved up 5-die villain, and I felt pretty good going with that into the tournament.
Yep.
And then the morning of, I was crossing the skywalk from the hotel into the convention center, and I was like, this doesn't feel right. This isn't what I want to play today. So I kind of just picked my tournament decks based on whatever seems the most interesting to me. I had about 10 games in total on Talzin Supercommandos, but it just seemed like something fun to play that day, and it ended up working out pretty well.
The old Audible.
I'm very impressed that you picked. I mean, at least you had played it before. If you had said, it sounded good, so I just put it together. But
the one thing I did know going in is I have 4 deck boxes on me at all times, and all of the 4 deck shells had Talzin in them. That was the only requirement for what I was running.
Yeah, I did. I am the exact same way in that I struggle a lot trying to pick a deck, and one of the things that I was trying this tournament was the last time I went to a big tournament was Worlds, and I switched my deck at the last minute, and it did not end up working out. So I told myself, no matter what happens, I am not going to switch decks. And then in playtesting the night before, I just got stomped on like 6 times in a row by my other friend Justin, who was running Cad Snoke, and I was like, I can't do this. I need to bring a different deck. And everybody like talked me down. So it's something I totally can relate to, because I go back and forth all the time. Like, I struggle picking a deck, and then when I finally pick one, I end up second guessing myself, and I end up asking other people for opinions. And this is the second time now that I've ended up landing on a deck that, after the fact, I'm like, I wish I had just brought the one that I wanted to bring instead of trying to, outsmart everyone with my meta call.
Yeah, there's a lot of regret that goes on sometimes with the last second calls if they don't work out as well.
Yep.
I'll say this: the one he wanted to bring was Mill. So
yeah,
you're welcome. We talked about it. So.
I know Mill disturbs a lot of people in the community. I'm okay with Mill. It doesn't bother me. I actually think I think its presence makes players better on the whole, because you have to start worrying about things other than just pitching for max damage every turn, which people get in a mindset of the disrupts, the discards, the pitching to reroll and accelerating their wing condition. All that stuff starts to matter a lot more, and I think it requires players to focus on other aspects of the game other than damage, and I think that just makes better players in general.
Listen, I want to ask you about that, but before we get to that, can you go? I mean, I know it's been a few days since the tournament, but how did your Swiss go? Like, how did day one go? Like, did you have any highlights or any memorable moments? Do you remember your matches enough to kind of give us a brief rundown?
So where do I want to start? I guess round 1. The only time I really get nervous is the first round of a tournament. For whatever reason, I feel like I've totally forgotten how to play before I first sit down. Like, do I know what these cards in my deck even do? Have I rolled these dice before? I don't know. So I get a lot of nerves before the first round of the tournament, and I remember sitting down at this one, and I saw the world's top 32 Matt sitting across from me at my table. And I might butcher his name, but Matei, and I don't know how you pronounce his last name. I think Mods actually knocked him out in the top round. Dragne or Dragne?
Canadian player, right?
I'm not sure. That would make sense, though, since he was at U.S. Champs. That wouldn't be too far to travel.
Yeah.
I'll say this: I know who you're talking about, and I also would butcher his name. So kudos.
Yeah. So Matei, if you're listening, I apologize. Hopefully, I'm at least getting the first name right. But I saw the mall mat, and I go, man, I don't know
That's
how
not
I
what you
feel
want to
about
see
this.
round 1.
Yeah, especially when I just made it. He was playing Yoda Ezra rookie pilot.
Yep.
Player, and the game, it worked out beautifully for me. It gave me a lot of confidence going forward. I enjoy playing skilled players, but it's tough to take the loss round 1. But I got 5 or 6 damage into Ezra. He was doing something where he's passing. I think he was waiting for me to roll in dice in the pool, and he'd mitigated a couple dice. But I was fine to sit there and just use the 2 free pings on Mando and pass into the next round without rolling anything out, because other than that, we pretty much drew on resources. So that game went relatively quickly. And then my next round was actually against, I can't remember his last name, but Chris, Agent of Zion from Artificery. So that was those are a good first 2 rounds for
Yeah,
the tournament.
Yeah, murderous row. Yeah.
Yeah, no cupcake games. And my match with Chris was a blast. I started out putting like 8 or 9 damage into, or 7 or 8 damage into Rose round 1. He was running Rose, Wedge, Hired Gun, I think.
Yep.
But he was able to spit out like a Rally Aid, a Crate Speeder, and 2 Air Speeders on turn 1, and just ramped. And
Gross.
we traded heals and damage, and it came down to the last round. He had a Hired Gun with 2 shields on him, and I think 4 health left. And I had a Frighten in hand, and Talzin had some upgrades on her. And I rolled out, and this actually ended up being pivotal later on in the finals match. But I rolled out, and I was so focused on getting damage and trying to get that 4 damage and then frighten the shields off. But I actually had a route to a mill victory that I just overlooked because he ended up with 0 cards in hand, and he rolled enough damage, I think 8 or 9 damage to kill Talzin that round. So I lost that one. I played, I think, a Cad Snoke in there somewhere.
Yep.
I played a Cassian Poe. The 2 character matchups for this list, every time I saw one, I was really excited because 20 health for the deck is pretty easy to chew through, and having 27 health on my side with Witch Magic, Force Illusion, armor plating, just it's really difficult to take a character off the board early if you can't spike them.
Yeah, I think I killed 1 Super Commando in our whole match.
And I don't think I don't think that happened till like round 3 or 4. So and that's just how it went. The 2 character lists, especially Cad Snoke, where Snoke is putting pressure on himself if he wants to resolve that side. They're doing your work for you. And with Talzin, you don't really need the rerolls, so the discard side doesn't even hurt that bad because you're probably focusing into at least 2 damage. So all the 2 character matchups were fine. There was a Yoda Qui-Gon in there too, I think.
That's old school.
The one interesting list I ran into, and I really feel bad about this game, was round 5. I was at, I think, 3-1 at the time, and the guy was running Emaz for the original Awakening's Ray, and then Elite Ezra, which was just a strange combination to see. And he had Starship Graveyard. And basically what every turn turned into, he'd hold out on Ray, take 2 actions, activate Ezra, and then roll out Maz, and it was guaranteed stealing a resource or 2 every turn. But it mostly just provided him ramp and like a kind of minor impedance to my economy, which wasn't so bad. But I dropped a backup muscle turn 1, and I'd used it for 2 turns, and I have a habit of saving the last backup muscle damage for Force Illusions or Shields, just kind of to kill someone off, because a lot of times there's no sense in just dumping it in just to put another damage on them, especially in a deck that doesn't have that 6 or 7 hitter. Everything's just 1s and 2s.
Right.
So we get to round 4, and he puts a shield on Maz at the end of the turn, and she has 1 health left, and I use the backup muscle, and we have a discrepancy about how many times the backup muscle had been used. And I just felt awful about it because we both knew it had dropped turn 1. I believed it was used twice. He thought it was already used 3 times. And the only real evidence we had to support either claim was that there was still a 1 damage token on the backup muscle.
Sure.
And all my matches were super friendly, and that one kind of turned it sour a little bit for him. And that was totally understandable, because if that was my opponent, and I was sure they'd used it 3 times, I'd kind of feel a little tilted too.
Sure.
So that was kind of an unfortunate experience.
It's an unfortunate situation, yeah.
But other than that, the 2 losses I took were both to vehicle decks. Someone was running a kind of a twist on drive-by shooting. Instead of the Elite Ezra die, they used a long-term plan.
Oh, yeah.
And that was my round before playing you.
That was Alberto.
In the finals?
He's one of
Yeah, that was Alberto. Yeah, he's a cool guy.
Yeah.
When you have to treat every 2-side as a 4-side, 3 or 4 turns in, it really messes with your mental math on how you can allocate damage and what dice you have to actually remove and what can sit there.
Yeah, I played a couple test games with him before the tournament, and that thing hits like a truck.
Yeah, if he can stall to get into those turns. I had a really low damage turn 1. I think I just saw 2 armor platings in hand, which is not ideal.
Yeah.
Was it the Rose to Partisan long-term plan, or?
No, this one was Yoda, Ezra, and Rookie Pilot.
Okay.
Yeah, and I couldn't
character dice to take long-term plan.
Yeah, I didn't get pressure on early, and he got pretty far ahead of me. I was somehow able to stabilize a little bit later on. and make it look close, but it was one of those games where you saw the end board state and it looked way closer than I think it actually was.
Yeah.
He just got too much off, and then the long-term plan left me with, I don't have much die mitigation in this deck.
Sure.
So once that 2's sitting out there, not a ton of ways to get rid of it. So it wasn't that close, but vehicle decks were definitely the toughest on the day. 2 character lists were a pleasure to see.
Yeah, I played 5 vehicle matchups in my 8 rounds of Swiss.
That sounds awful.
Well, we did say it was going to be a vehicle heavy tournament.
Yeah, and that's why I brought the deck that I brought. And those are most of my wins, was because I had teched into retreats into hyperspace jumps.
Okay.
To battle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense then. I was actually on the original reason I picked 5-die villain was because Bala, you can usually focus all that damage early on and they don't have a ton of mitigation.
Yep.
If you play it right. And if you can get that early Bala reset with a weapon or 2 on them, it's really easy to take down because they tend to have a few lower health characters sitting around.
Yep, for sure.
Now, you say that there's not a whole lot of control in your deck. Are you taking the philosophy of like a vehicle deck where part of your control is the 27 health that you have?
Yeah, so I've gotten a lot of questions on it. So there's articles on it, Magic using... in the game of Magic, using your life as a kind of a resource, right? So if you have a naturally high health pool, you can afford to take hits that, maybe 2 character decks have to worry about a little bit more. And there's a lot of post-resolution mitigation is kind of how I think about it. So for instance, Witch Magic, I let them resolve the 3. I can't directly remove it. But once they put it in there, you can heal 2 or 3 most of the time. Armor plating and force illusion are kind of the same way. So you let them put a little bit of damage into you. They think they're close to killing you. And then you say, oh no, I got an extra 2 health. I got an extra 5 health if you have a modifier. So in terms of removing dice, it just didn't seem necessary, especially as also running 4 annexes. So if they had a modifier out in a base side, you could just eat the base
with
side.
that in mind, let's go over
the modifier.
For our listeners that aren't on the Twitch stream, I'm going to quickly just go through the deck list so that people know kind of what we're talking about here. So obviously it's Elite Mother Talzin and 2 Mandalorian Supercommandos with Fort Annexes as the battlefield. And it has 16 upgrades. So it's got 2 armor plating, 2 chance cube, 2 force illusion, 2 force push, 1 force rend, 1 force throw, 1 force wave, 1 LL30 blaster, 2 Mandalorian Van Braces, 2 Sith Holocron, 2 backup muscle for supports, and then 12 events, 1 electroshock, 2 feel your anger, 2 flank, 2 frighten, 1 overconfidence, 1 triple threat, 1 under attack, and 2 witch magic. So I noticed right off the bat you have, I think it's 5 even cards, is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So,
and the 5th was an inclusion. We had a local player actually take this to a store champ, and he won with it, and he mentioned that he had 2 LL30s in there. And I was really confused at first. I asked him if he still had the chance cubes. He's like, yep. He's like, do you still have the holocrons? He's like, yep. And I was surprised he's running with 6 because it seems like a lot for me.
Seems like a lot.
Yeah, but he swore by them. And I had probably, 24, 25 cards picked out of the deck. I have like my essential Talzin package that goes with me everywhere. Feel your anger, witch magic.
Yep.
Like core Talzin cards. And I had most of what I wanted in the deck. And I had about 4 to 5 flex slots. And I just remember him saying he really liked LL30, and I had it in my kind of spare card case, and I just said, what the heck, I'll throw it in there.
Did it work out for you? Did you like it?
No, that was that was awful. It provided no value. I was
gonna say I didn't want to like trash the decision. I was like, man, out of all the 2-cost guns, that is not my first choice.
So so the holdout blaster probably would have been the better. It's gray, so kind of diversifies a little bit more for Kylo calls. Still has redeploy, still has ambush, and it has that 2 base side, which is kind of nice. The LL30, the reason I picked that, I guess I wasn't even thinking about holdout blaster when I put it in there. So I can't really compare those two, but as opposed to something like X8, I was really after the redeploy keyword. So kind of being able to transfer some of the upgrades over. You can't bounce the force powers. You can't bounce the holocrons. Usually you can get a chance cube back into your hand if you want it before something dies. You can get a Mandalorian Van Braces back in your hand, but I really wanted something that just kept providing value after it was paid for.
Yep.
And so I was really focused on the redeploy keyword, but it didn't pan out. And most of the games, when something died, I just didn't have it in hand at a proper time, so it didn't provide any value.
Sure,
and
yeah.
there's a lot of games where nothing really even died anyway, so I would definitely remove that.
Yeah, is there anything
triple
else you would edit if you were to go back and do it all over?
Yeah, triple threat. So I know a lot of people have been asking about certain cards because they're kind of odd cards. I remember on stream, as Mike Gem or Zach Bunn, whoever is casting the game, was really surprised that triple threat was in there.
Yep.
I ran Talzin Thrawn at Worlds, and my biggest gripe with the deck was that there was so little multi-die interaction. If you're running Spell of Removal, Mislead, you could run Best Defense, but it hurt you. So I really wanted something that interacted with multiple dice. Okay, they rolled out 2-3 damage sides. How am I going to handle that?
Yep.
So that was the goal of triple threat, and it was odd. There was no spot cost to it. But it just didn't really become relevant. And most of the time I didn't want to touch 2 character dice. I'd rather touch one of their upgrade dice or something. So that was okay, but it wasn't great. I'd take that out. Under attack, I don't know. The times it was useful, it was really useful. So in one of my top 8 matches, Kylo, he focused into 2 base sides and the +3 ancient. And I was able to use under attack to just eat the base sides for 4 indirect, spread 2 to 1 commando, and then 1 on Talzin and the other commando.
Nice.
And just strand the 3 base side, and it crippled his first turn.
When you have so much health and like 3 characters to spread it between, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and something you can do, so you can put with under attack, and I think it would be better if I used 2 of them to do this, but you can potentially put a Force Illusion on a fully healthy Mando or Talzin. And if they roll out 8 damage, you can use under attack to turn it all indirect, sign all 8 to that one person.
Sure.
And then use the Force Illusion to mitigate 8.
Yeah, that's
the
gross.
full 8.
Milling 8 cards hurts though.
Sure.
Yeah, but them losing 8 damage if they don't have any additional milled pressure is probably the game right there.
Yeah, especially, I mean, as long as you have a deck to use Talzin's ability, if you're taking 8 cards off the top, the game's going to be over by the time you go to mill most of the time anyway. So
Right, and the thing about this deck too is it's mill resistant a little bit with the chance cubes and Van Braces.
Yep.
So if the deck you're playing against doesn't have the dedicated resources to discard from hand kind of on command or discard from the top of the deck, you can cycle those 2 cards for an obscenely long time. So even without a deck, it's like playing with Ancient for a lot of decks. You can recycle it, and if they have no way to take it from you, the game just keeps going on.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense.
I have a question for you here. The battlefield choice is a little odd to me. So your deck, I would assume, runs at least fairly slow. Did Fort Anaxis, did it come in handy for you throughout the day, or was it you just...
So Fort Annexes there were 3 things that went into it. 1, I've played with it before, so it was kind of a known quantity for the deck. I'm used to playing with it. I'm used to playing against it. So it was at least something that felt safe. The second part of it was I had maybe 3 battlefields on hand in total, and the only one of them that made a lick of sense was Fort Annexes. So it was kind of out of necessity.
Good reason as any.
Yeah. The third part of it is, for me, especially against 2 character decks, it really comes down to the first turn. Are they going to be able to put one of my characters at risk of death either within that turn or the top of turn 2 before I get a chance to respond? If they want to go first, so for instance, in round 3, Cad Snoke chose to go first, I get 2 free shields and Talzin becomes an 11 health character.
Yep.
I'm okay with that trade-off. If they want to let me have my battlefield, and this doesn't work as well against action cheating decks, but say Kylo Snoke, for instance, if they want me to have my battlefield, I am going to eat their base side with 4 Annex. So unless they're showing multiple base sides and a modifier all at once, they're not going to be able to resolve any heavy modifiers, and most likely that base damage is going to be spent to 2 separate targets, which is going to make it really difficult for them to kill anything in round 2 without a really strong roll.
Yeah, makes sense. If you had your whole collection with you, do you have another battlefield that you would have wanted in place of that? You think, or were you pretty happy
There's
with
nothing
it?
there's nothing I really want. There's a guy
Sure.
on, mostly just because I haven't played with it and I haven't given it that much thought because it was kind of a spur of the moment deck decision. Someone mentioned what's the title? Penteki Arena,
Yeah. Is that
the one that deals an indirect for
each
each character you
character?
have defeated,
Yep.
Right.
which is
For
kind
that-
of interesting. But I also don't want to give an avenue for 2 character decks to kind of get back in it, or
Right.
say like a 3 character vehicle deck or 4 character vehicle deck. But that's interesting. So the battlefield probably could use some improvement. I just rolled with this. I
Sure.
actually liked it for most of the day. I didn't mind it.
Yeah.
It was fine. It wasn't great.
So I've played around with this deck a little bit, and the battlefield that I'm actually kind of zoning in on right now is an old one, but it's
Is it Mos Eisley?
Mos Eisley Spaceport.
Yeah, that's the one that bounces back to hand for the resource, right?
So
Yeah.
bouncing that holocron back to hand for a resource, like pull it off of, say, Talzin or whatever, get your resource back, and then next turn start the cycle all over again. Same thing with Chance Cube, same thing with, I mean, Van Braces, instead of using the action, get a resource for it when you claim. Like, I mean, I like options for that. And it's not the best mill defense, but it's something, like
Sure.
I think, and I'm totally on board with that. Now that you mention it, that was one of the ones someone else had brought up. It wasn't myself, but I think it might have been the one that our local used when he played the store champ. He might have been using that one. And it makes perfect sense, right? You're playing these inexpensive upgrades. You get your money back. It gives you a chance to reset your Mando triggers. All those are great things. I think my concern was, and maybe I played too much around this because the ease 2 character lists were kind of a breeze for the deck throughout the day, so I could probably stand to give up something against them. But stuff like Cad Snoke, I didn't want to give them kind of a free resource
Sure.
going back to hand and then having another weapon, like another ambush weapon, so they can automatically, you're going to guarantee that trigger for them if
Right.
they want it on the Cad Snoke or on the Cad Snoke resolution. And I didn't want to give them any more advantage. Or if I came up against a Sabine deck,
Right, and they're definitely going to be claiming
something for resource.
every
Yeah,
round.
so there's a lot of all those action cheating decks, especially if they're running Maz's Vault or something where they have the extra resource on top of it. I don't want to accelerate a lot of those action cheating decks. But that said, sometimes I don't think it offers a lot of value. That extra resource, it's an extra resource for them, but it doesn't really amount to anything in terms of their damage output, so it's not that risky. And if you can bounce a Chance Cube for money, that's pure profit. And if you can bounce a Holocron for money, that's amazing, because the Holocron itself doesn't come back to hand without the force power. So that's pure value there.
Yep.
I think after the finals, if I wanted to tech this against Mill, I think I might try Starship Graveyard.
To cycle things back in your deck. Yeah.
Yeah, just so they mill your upgrades, especially because I expect if this deck gets any sort of foothold and becomes popular, I expect Ren, or maybe not Ren, possibly Ren, but that or Vandalize to come into fashion, and people discarding the cheap upgrades, especially Chance Cube, which is 2 free damage a turn.
Yeah.
And I think I lost one to Flames in the past in the finals, but with the opportunity to put it back on deck.
It's a very underrated card. I like that.
Yeah.
No, it's not. I hate that card so much.
Which one? Flames of the Past?
Flames of the Past. I hate that card.
It's definitely a strong.
I don't actually know. Does it touch supports or is it just upgrades?
Any card in play that has a copy of another card in any discard.
Oh man, that's perfect with unique supports or unique upgrades too.
And
so they pitch it for the reroll and then you just burn it.
I've gotten rid of huge vehicles and vehicle matchups. It's gross. I love it.
It is gross. Very gross. The
All right,
less people know about that card, the better.
Yeah. All right, so you navigate your way through 8 rounds of Swiss. Obviously it sounds like it's some pretty tough matchups in there, and then you beat some scrub in the 8th round. So you finally make it to day 2, and you're going through all these grinds of best of 3 with 32 players. Tell us a little bit about what that was like. The format, if I recall correctly, so it was 34 players, right? 2 of them had to play a play-in game to make it down
Correct.
to 32. And then,
So
tell us a little bit about what that experience was like and how that went.
I don't know how well known this story is. People who follow in the Discord probably know it a little bit. my first round opponent, his name is Travis. I can't pronounce his last name, so I'm not going to try. But Travis was, I think, 7-1 the previous day, and he's running a 4-wide vehicle list, which was just, I think it was 33 health in total, which is just a nightmare to have to chew through.
Yep.
And the worst part about it is, if you're playing a Rose whatever deck, if you kill Rose with 2 dice, it feels like you did something productive. Like the dice that you removed off the table were meaningful.
Yeah.
All his characters just generally trash dice that he doesn't care about, I don't care about. So you kill a 9 health character, and it doesn't feel like you did anything except
killing that Jedi Temple Guard does not feel as good.
Yeah. It was a nightmare. But all that said, and this is why I personally kind of put an asterisk on my run. The gentleman, and I feel terrible for him, he sat down on the table, and I have all my stuff out, and he reaches in his bag, and he just looks around puzzled for a second. He had forgotten his deck at the hotel.
Oh no!
I heard about this story.
Yeah, which was about 15 minutes away. And he calls him up on the phone. He asks his friend if he can bring it. His friend says he'll be there in 15 minutes. And at this point, I feel terrible. Like, I don't want free wins. I play in events because I enjoy playing the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like the competitive environment. And I want some prep games and the odd chance I win, which I wasn't expecting, I didn't want to go into the next round cold. So I was like, man, I really want to play some games. I hope this works out. So he had agreed. He said he would concede the first game. We'd play 2 games. And then the only condition I added was that if the second game goes to time, that he concedes to me. So since it was his fault for the reason we were going to be starting late.
Right.
And so that was cool. That was all agreed upon. And we're just sitting there waiting, and the judge comes over and looks at us, and he goes, "Did you guys finish your match?" We're like, "No, we're waiting for him to bring a deck." And they had ruled that after 5 minutes he was given a game loss, and after 10 minutes it was a match loss. And there was no negotiating for us on our end.
Gotcha.
That was just, those were the rules. They were sticking to it. And I think his friend got there about 13 minutes in the round, or maybe 12 minutes in the round. So it wasn't much after.
Right.
And they knew I was on board with our solution. Travis was obviously in favor of playing, and he went and appealed to the judge and then to the head of OP, and they just weren't giving in. So 12 minutes in, I was advancing to the next round.
That's brutal.
The worst part is we played 2 games afterwards, and they were like,
stomped you.
They weren't stomps. Like the first one was decently close.
Yeah.
He had quite a bit of health to spare. The second one was really close, but he ended up 2-0 in both of those games. And I don't know why either of us wanted to play those games.
Yeah.
That
Just
from either standpoint, it just looks bad. Like
just makes everyone feel worse.
If I lose, which is what happened, I'm sitting there feeling really bad about myself going to the next round and been like, man, I don't deserve this. And if he wins, it's just going to be a worse situation for him. He's going to hate himself more for forgetting the deck. So I felt terrible for the guy. That's how the first round went.
It's a brutal way to go out. Yeah.
It was
brutal.
It was not pretty. But kudos to Travis. He was a real cool dude about it afterwards. And he actually kind of kept checking in on me throughout the day and asking, how I was progressing. So I thought that was kind of cool. I think I would have been too mad at myself to check back in on the tournament. So
I would not be anywhere near the Destiny area.
I'd take a real long walk.
Yeah.
So I guess I technically 2-0'd that one through no skill of my own.
Hey, that's what the record book says. It's all that matters.
Yeah, exactly. My next opponent was Nick Obi. So
Texter?
He was, yes, Texter. Yep. He was on the same deck that Chris was on, Agent of Zion, in round 2. So I'd seen it before. Rose, E-Rose, Wedge, and a hired gun. And it was one of those games, the first game, I don't know if I could have scripted it any better. You could ask me to pick my perfect hand, and I think I would have done a worse job than how it ended up playing out. He friends and low placed me first round. I had 5 upgrades or 4 upgrades and a support. So he whiffs. I have something like Holocron, Force Rend, Chance Cube, Backup Muscle, and I don't know, some other card. And I'm able to get the resources from the Chance Cube, and I'm able to get the Force Rend out and onto the special. And from turn 1 on, pretty much any support he played just got nuked by the Force Rend. So we were in round 3 or 4, and all he has out is a C-3PO.
Oh
And
man.
Rose died at the top of turn 2, and I end
Oh.
up re-rolling into, it was one of my only like sweet rolls of the day. I rolled into 8 damage and took out a hired gun, and then he just scooped so he had time.
Yep.
In the second game, it was kind of similar. Rose died either round 1 or early round 2, and he got a little bit more ramp, but yeah, the Mandalorian deck was just on fire at that point. It was hitting everything it needed to hit and
That force
killing
rend
characters quickly.
Seems like it came in handy quite a bit. That's actually how the one part of our game where I was kind of scrapping it back together to maybe, at least make it look respectable, you force rendered my second chance. So it
Yeah.
sounds like that came in handy quite a bit throughout the day.
Yeah, especially with Chance Cube out there, you have the resources to buy it off if you can snag both of them. And a lot of the upgrades you're concerned about aren't that expensive. And a lot of times, if I have a Chance Cube bouncing around, I'm really not concerned about my money. It's once you get the upgrades down, it's not as necessary. You can usually find resources. So getting rid of Chance Cubes, or if I could have seen it in the finals, I could have gotten rid of the the pod racer. That when you asked me about changes earlier, I think that's one more change I'd make. I think I'd change the force wave for either another force rend, or sorry, the force throw for either another force rend or force wave. I really like the ability to discard upgrades and supports. Vandalize would be another option too.
Yep.
So that was my match against Nick. Went 2-0 there. I was feeling pretty good about vehicles, but I was tired of seeing 3 wide lists because it's just a slog and you never know how it's going to go. My next match was Kylo Snoke. He's playing the guy that actually was, I think, the last seed to sneak in. So he was the 32nd or 34th seed or something.
Okay.
And he played his way to the top 8. He took out the 1 seed and one other high seed with Kylo Snoke. And I just breathed a sigh of relief because, like I said, 2 character lists tend to go down pretty quickly, especially if Snoke's going to be doing some of my work for me. And I think Kylo took 7 or 8 round 1. I talked about under attack earlier, how I just ate the 4 damage and spread it out. So sitting with about 1 damage on each character. Kylo has no upgrades. He had to already use his turn 1 ancient lightsaber to heal off some damage.
That's huge.
So he ended up getting a ton of resources, and he he used Rise Again twice, healing 10. So it was a prolonged match.
Yep.
But I think I ended the game with, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 damage across all my characters because he just had to spend so much doing other things.
Staying alive,
Wait, you dealt 33 damage and he dealt 6 to 8?
Well,
Some of which he dealt himself with under attack.
Yeah. So he might have did a little bit more damage, but Witch Magic probably healed 3 of it off somewhere. There's probably an armor plating in there. So the end state was nothing was really in danger of dying.
Yep.
And yeah, he took a lot of damage that game.
That's awesome.
And the round 2 was just more of the same. I think it's really difficult. Cad Snoke at least gets the action cheating, so they get a chance to blow up a character before I have any response to it. But Kylo Snoke, without a force speed on Snoke, just plays so fair. Yep. And I had 4 annexes, so all the base sides I could just eat. And he's can't resolve the Snoke for money, or he puts Kylo closer to death.
Sure.
It's just a tough matchup, I think, for him.
Yep.
And he played well, but
that was top 8?
That was top 8.
Okay.
So top 32 was the Forgotten deck.
Yep.
Top 16 was Nick Obi. Top 8 was Kylo Snoke. And by the way, I forgot to mention, I was up till 4:30. I don't know if you ever played the game Quartermaster General. It's kind of like Axis and Allies, I've been told, but we were up super late playing that game. And every match I somewhat secretly wished, I think I even told you this when we played. Yeah. I secretly wished someone would just mop me off the table.
You're running out of steam at that point.
So I could get some sleep or get some food or do something.
You had the chance round 1. Could have taken a nap.
I know.
You had to play those ghost games and just
I should have done it. And that's the other part is I had 0 nerves or stress going into day 2. Yep. I was too tired to care, and which made it kind of easier to play because every game was really relaxed.
So Jordan's hot tournament prep the night before the tournament.
Switch decks at the last minute.
And then don't get
2 hours sleep.
Stay up really late. And then hope that your opponent forgets their deck round one. So
I'm doing everything
All right.
wrong.
All
Yeah.
right. I'm gonna do that.
Anyone tells you to run a gauntlet or play a ton of games or pick your deck weeks beforehand, they're
Not
not
important.
doing it right.
Yeah, not important.
So
Absolute
what was
wrong
your
way.
what was your top 4 matchup?
Top 4. So we got into kind of felt a little bit like Rocky going in because I think it was an all Hyperloops top 4 with the exception of me.
I
So
believe it was. Yeah, it was.
I played Nick.
Okay.
His last name I can never pronounce. I think it's Cuenca.
Yep, I believe
And
so.
Yep. And he was on Afra, Snoke, and Battle Droid, which I had never seen before. And so my previous experience with Hyperloops is I played Joe Colon at the, or is it Cologne? I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name either.
I think it's
Cologne. Yeah.
Cologne. Sorry, Joe. I played him at Worlds with Ron Talzin in the final round of Swiss, and that was the first time I'd seen the Yoda Ezra rookie pilot list.
Oh yeah.
And I just got mopped. I was playing Thrawn Talzin. I was feeling good. I got a vehicle out of hand, and then he just focused into 8 damage with characters that you just typically don't think of as spitting out damage, and it was over really early. So it was nice to see Nick and another deck that I'd never played before and had no idea what to do against. And I honestly wasn't sure who I was going to target until I sat down and finished shuffling my cards, and I guess I realized the only thing I was really afraid of was him resolving a 3 resource side with Snoke's power action, which the only way he could do that was Afra. So I decided she'd be the first target, and even if he did resolve the 3 resource side, as Snoke does, he's going to put me one step closer to killing that character. And I felt bad for Nick because both games against Nick, I saw exactly what I needed to see. And first game, Afra melted round 1. I think I did 10 or 11 damage into her. And then game 2, she started off with 8 or 9 damage on her. And that for him was a huge blow because that's kind of his whole deck revolves around Afra more so than I think.
It's engines upon engines.
More so than most. Afra is one of those characters. It's kind of like Talzin. Talzin, there's going to be a lot of odds. You can pick out the staple odds that are going to be in there. So Afra's kind of that way too. You can expect BT1s and 000s and a couple, key indirect damage cards. So you have an idea of what's in there, but I didn't realize it until I got more through the deck of how much his deck really does rely on Afra, specifically like the card draw ability and just the free resource for the droids. So taking her out, I think, turned out to be the right call because I was able to do it really quickly. First game, he was able to mount a bit of a comeback, getting some indirect. I think he ended up putting me within 10 health of dying. And he actually was able to get one character off the table, but that's when I had lethal showing in the form of backup muscle. But then game 2, I think he only put out, I can't remember, I think it might have just been a slave 1. He didn't have any droids out, and he wasn't really able to get any more damage. And I think I ended with 7 or 8 damage on me in total. So he definitely didn't see the pieces that he needed to see to make that deck tick, and I was able to wipe Afra on the board really early. So that was another 2-0. And then the finals with Andrew was another Hyperlooper and yet a third deck that I had also never seen of before. So
that whole crew, the Hyperloops crew, there were like 5 of them that brought that deck to Gen Con, which is why it was so prevalent in day 2. Like, yes, it's obviously a really strong deck, but it was also piloted by a bunch of really strong players.
Yeah, by players I imagine that have the opposite prep regimen of me.
They slept the night before.
I think they probably got more sleep, and they probably, I'm going to say, put in just a few more test games than I did.
So. More than literally changing decks while you're walking to the event.
They are the models of consistency, and for anyone out there, there's going to be games where you just get rolled off the table, but all you need to do is look at them and, some of the artificery guys, people that consistently show up at the top tables. So anyone that tries to pin the game is just luck. If that was the case, those people wouldn't be where they are on a consistent basis. And so all that preparation really does pay off.
That's very true.
So finals, there's a lot to unpack here. I don't know where you want to start.
Yeah, so there were. It was a really interesting match, in my opinion. Like it went to 3 games. It was for those of you who don't know, it was obviously Jordan, and then he was playing against a elite Yoda, 1 die Cassian, 1 die Anakin, young Anakin, mill deck, and so it ran things like Anakin's Pod Racer, which is obviously huge in that deck because it can hit your hand and your deck uh, however it wants, and it was just kind of like a variation on the popular Yoda Cassian mill, but with a lot of extra health. And it was a super interesting matchup. So I guess my first question for you is going into that matchup. Obviously, you didn't know the deck, but you probably at least knew it was a mill deck. Did you feel favored because you have things like Chance Cube and Van Braces, or did you think you were kind of an underdog?
Well, at that point, I had my fill of 3 wide. 27 health just seemed like too much to eat through for a mill deck. That's just a lot to ask. The deck against the deck against the deck whose sole purpose is to limit your rerolls, discard your deck, and mitigate your dice. Eating through just 27 damage alone, especially in blue yellow with tons of strong removal in damage prevention cards like Second Chance. Well, not I guess life extending cards like Second Chance and Force Illusion. That's just a tall order on its own. And my deck didn't really have any spike damage, so any target I picked, it was going to be well known in advance of their death that I was going for them. So there's no surprise kills. And this actually happened in one of the games. You get Anakin down to 1 or 2 health, and then he knows to play the Second Chance. He doesn't have to play it on him when he's at 2 damage or 3 damage because he knows I'm not going to be spiking him off the table.
Pings and such,
Yeah, so I was really expecting to just get blown out both games, even with the Chance Cube and Van Braces for kind of that recursion. It just seemed like too much health to chew through in the time that he would go through my deck. So
and I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, you actually won game 2 via mill. Is that right?
I did win game 2 via mill. So game one was kind of ideal for me. I can't remember if that was the game. I think it might have been the game I dropped both Van Braces turn 1, which is great because as I'm playing this game, there's 4 cards in the deck I really don't want to lose. That's the 2 Van Braces and the 2 Chance Cubes because they can buy me turns if he doesn't show the right die faces. And we actually played on my battlefield first to start, so Imperial Palace wasn't a concern. So any card that got bounced back to hand, he'd have to be representing that discard side to get rid of it.
Right.
So I saw both of those turn 1. I think Yoda took 8 damage. I took him out early in turn 2, and I was feeling really good about the whole game. I was like, hey, this is going way better than I expected. And I think I got Anakin down to, 1 or 2 health. And then he dropped back-to-back second chances on him. Or maybe it was Cassian. I can't remember. But there were 2 second chances, and I don't think he was that far in his deck either, maybe halfway through. And they just came up in back-to-back rounds, and it just, at that point,
it's so much
that
to chew
you're
through.
in trouble.
Yeah.
And I stopped by. He was doing an AMA with Mike Gem the other night, and I stopped by for a second, and we just had a real brief conversation about targeting. And Andrew was talking about how poor people were targeting his deck that game, and he thought they should be going for Anakin.
Yeah.
And the concern with my deck is a deck that does drip feed damage, 1s and 2s. If you can't spike them off the table, they have all the time in the world to prep for that first second chance to get those 3 resources.
Sure.
And if my first target was Anakin and I get him to 6 damage, say round 1, and round 2 he drops that second chance, I'm in trouble because then Yoda's resolved 4 dice by then, getting shields, getting resources, and I haven't done anything productive to remove anyone off the table. So in my mind, Yoda had to be the target specifically for my deck. With the different aggro deck, I think you probably try and take Anakin off the table. But I was specifically targeting Yoda.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I know if it were me personally playing in the game, I would probably target the exact same way. Take out Yoda first, Anakin second, and then Cassian third.
Yep, but, and that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I think in my mind, so Andrew seems to think that Anakin should be priority number 1, but he's really not that big of a threat until that pod racer drops.
Yeah.
So you have a little bit of time, I guess, if you see the pod racer, and I'm guessing Andrew probably hides it for as long as he can if he has it in hand round 1. But I'm guessing until then, Yoda just there's too much value there and too much consistency.
Yeah, I agree. Getting rid of Anakin, and even then, when you kill Anakin, the pod racer still mills a card off the top of your deck. It just doesn't eat from
Correct.
your hand anymore. Which
Right, and the whole time Yoda's building money and shields and
right.
focus. So I think that's, to his credit, that's one of the great things about the deck is it does present you with a tough decision
Absolutely.
early on.
Yep.
And I think that's a key to a lot of good decks. In fact, against aggro decks, I think people struggle, against the Mando deck, I think people struggle with that same thing. Is Talzin has the dice and the focus, but the Mandos are 2 free damage every turn with a chance cube. It's exactly what people want Kylo to be every turn. 2 free damage, 2 free damage. Yep. So presenting your opponent with tough decisions on who to target, I think, is a sign of a good deck.
Yep, for sure. So there were a couple kind of highlights or interesting things that happened that I wanted to go over really quick. The first is, I believe this one was in game 3. There was a point in time where you had enough damage showing to kill Cassian, I believe it was. And you
I think it's to kill Anakin.
To kill Anakin, I'm sorry.
Yes.
That's right. And you ended up doing it to Cassian instead. So
yes.
Is there a thought process behind that, or is it just kind of fatigue getting to you, or what happened there?
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
So to anyone watching, and this includes myself when I watched the replay, Anakin is 100% the person that should go down in that instant. There's no other way to put it. It was a huge mistake. But that doesn't mean there wasn't a thought process.
Sure.
But to understand the thought process, you have to kind of suspend reality for a second. So as an analogy, I'll start out with when you first play Tarkin or against Tarkin, or when you first play Luke 3 or against Luke 3, they kind of alter the rules of the game. So what you see on the table isn't really what you're playing against, right? So Tarkin, you got to condition yourself. Whenever you see 2 of the same symbol, that really represents 4 indirect damage.
Yep. When
you're playing against Luke 3, you got to start treating those shield sides as shields or melee damage. So at one point in the stream, I think it's Zach Bunn, one of the commentators, mentions that we have a reader because I look at Clandestine Operation and I look at Anakin's Pod Racer early on in the game. I actually knew what both of those cards did.
Sure.
In the sense that I could tell you the text on the card, and I wanted to confirm that the text on the card was exactly what I thought it was.
Right.
The problem with that is that if you don't have the experience and repetition with cards, just knowing the text, especially that far into a tournament when I was that fatigued, just knowing the text isn't enough. At some level, you have to be able to just kind of incorporate that and internalize it into your game plan and actions naturally without having to spend mental resources on it. And having never played the card, having never seen the card, I was not at that point. I had actually been the opposite. I had become conditioned to just default assume that Anakin's Pod Racer discarded from hand.
Okay.
So when I'm laying out that damage, I'm assuming that the Pod Racer is discarding from hand regardless. So I'm first of all not thinking about taking Anakin off the table.
Mm-hmm.
The second, and a part of that is I think with that in mind, I have one more turn at most, which means I can't afford to waste any damage that comes my way. I had a Force Wave on the table. So if I killed Anakin there, that Force Wave would only provide 3 damage for me next turn because he'd be on Cassian alone. Whereas if I put the damage into Cassian instead, that Force Wave is going to get to resolve for the full 5. And then I think I only need to find 3 damage from other sources as opposed to 5. So my choice was built on reason and logic. There was a thought process behind it. The problem was that thought process was just a totally contrived scenario that didn't exist. And that's where all of that preparation and all of those reps really pay off, having experience with those cards. And I can guarantee you, now that I have the 3 games of experience, I will never make that mistake again. But that's a learning experience, and that's that's the price you pay when you don't prepare as well as some of the other people do.
To be fair to you, you had been going for like 8 hours at that point without a meal, correct?
It was a long day. I had not eaten. There was no formal break. We took a couple 10-minute breaks,
right?
But Andrew was in the same situation too. So it was just one of those things. If I'd prepared more, if I had played that card a bit, kind of researched what other people were playing, it might have been a different outcome. So there was thought process there. It was not the correct thought process. And the worst part is, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that's an important part of the game in general, is kind of realizing when you make a mistake and learning from it. Like a lot of times you look back and you're like, oh, I did that because of this, and then it's sometimes hard to go back and analyze. I mean, this one is maybe a little more obvious than your usual scenario, but there's a lot of times you go back and you're like, it's really helpful to just fully analyze, like, was this the best decision in this situation? How could I have done it better?
Yeah, this would be like a giant neon Vegas flashing sign of errors. So it's not difficult to spot, and I'm sure any chat or viewers are wondering how I ever made it.
How did this
that
noob
far
make it to the finals?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. I was listening to the stream on my commute home from work, and when I got in, I was sitting there glued to it, watching it, and I gasped when you targeted. And like my girlfriend, she was like, "What is the matter?" I was like, "You don't even want to know the explanation, but just know that something bad happened."
Yeah, and the best part, like, obviously I didn't realize the error at the time, and I was so tired. And after the game, Joe came up to me and he's like, you could have killed Anakin there and saved the discard. And the magnitude of the mistake didn't register until like 2 days later when I watched the stream. I just shrugged it off. I was like, yeah, I probably could have done something different. And I was like, yeah. And then I watched it 2 days later, and I had to pause the screen at that moment. I could not watch anymore. It was too embarrassing. So I had to stop it. I eventually slogged through it, but it was brutal. And the worst part is, if you look at that game, if I make that decision there, because he doesn't have the discard side showing, he had to pitch to reroll, I think, after that action. Sure. If I make that decision, I have a fairly solid chance of victory at that point, given what he had at the table.
A 50-50 at worst.
Yeah, it was looking clean. His discard sides were numbered. He had very few upgrades. The pod racer not being able to discard from hand anymore, at least on the resolution. I think
and not being able to flip it to 2 shields every time he activates.
Yeah, I think I might have had 1 Vambrace and 1 Chance Cube, which is enough to buy probably 2 more turns. So I had a pretty good shot at victory. But like I said, that's where that preparation and repetition, that stuff pays off. And sure. I did not put in the work like that.
Yeah. All right. So there was one more interesting scenario that popped up. A lot of people have been talking about this in the Discords, and I just kind of want to get your thoughts on it. So there was a situation, I believe this was in one of the earlier games. I don't think it was in Game 3, but there was a time where a round came to an end, and you had claimed, and Andrew went to ready all of his characters and realized he hadn't rolled in Anakin yet. He had taken his 2 resources, realized he didn't roll in Anakin. He asked if you were okay with him doing that, given that he had already started readying everything. He asked the judge as well. Everybody seemed okay with it. He rolled in Anakin, did whatever Anakin did, and then afterward took 2 resources for the turn, so he ended up taking 4 resources for that round. Now, I've watched this a couple times on the stream. I was there in person. I didn't notice. No one there noticed, obviously, or they would have said something. I've watched it a couple times. I firmly believe that it was completely an accident. Like, I don't think there was any, intention to cheat there at all. There are people who have questioned it, so I just wanted to get your thoughts on, obviously you didn't notice it in the moment, but what do you have any thoughts on that and kind of what happened there?
So first, the match with Andrew is probably my favorite match of all time. It's really difficult to find, to play like a high stakes, intense match and keep it kind of like relaxed and casual. We were allowing small takebacks through the whole thing.
Sure.
My philosophy on it is, if I haven't started to reveal what I'm doing and you want to change your decision, it literally hasn't impacted me to that point. So as far as reactivating Anakin, I want to win when he's at his best and he does all the things correct. So I want him to net that resource or shield or whatever it happened to be from Anakin. So that part, no problem for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the resources, I don't think there was a thing malicious about it. I don't know if anyone noticed, but I put 4 damage into Cassian when I killed could have killed Anakin. We were a bit tired and fatigued at that point, so it was a long day of Destiny. It was a long 2 days of Destiny. I think we were 1.5 hours into that match. The games were so tight, and even more than just being tired, you have kind of a set routine when you end a turn.
Absolutely.
It's ready all my characters, take my resources, and just the way we had played that turn, it led him to kind of run through that end of turn process twice. And so I think it was just a product of habit, and I felt worse for him just because I don't want there to be any question about who won that match or who played better that match. It was definitely him by all accounts, and he was real cool about it. He came up and apologized to me the next day. I told him there was nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
And
that's good.
Because that was game 3, and even after that,
that was game 3. Okay.
Yeah, the only reason I remember that is someone put a timestamp on it, and I just happened to look at it because I had no idea what people were talking about in chat. But
that's exactly what I was thinking. Is that easy mistake to make with that routine? Like you can tell he was just kind of going through the motions at that point for ending his turn.
Yeah, it was just an automatic process, just tons of repetition, and even considering those resources, like I said, if I kill Anakin that second to last turn, I'm in pretty good shape to win. So the game was still winnable despite that, and it wasn't malicious or intentional, all in my mind. So it was a non-issue for me. So hopefully people on the internet don't let it bother them too much. I know the hyperloops kind of amongst some people have kind of a bad reputation, or some people just dislike them for whatever reason because they get good results. But
they win a lot.
They do
win. Put a bad taste in people's mouths.
So I think people are just looking for reasons to dislike them.
Say out of all of the Hyperloops guys, hasn't he been on the receiving end of a cheating
someone mentioned that too,
malicious cheater? I don't think he would be the kind of guy.
So I think people are just trying to fuel a fire that shouldn't exist, and it didn't bother me at all.
That's one of my favorite things about the Destiny community in general is even like the most hyper competitive of them are still like the community is still friendly enough where, like you said, we were doing minor takebacks in the finals of the North American Championships, and it's just like there's no malice there. People just want to get together, play this game that we all love, and just kind of compete. And
I mean that's why we're there, right, to play the game. And I don't want to win when someone's not playing their best anyway. So I don't know, takebacks and all that stuff always makes sense to me. As long as I haven't started to show what I'm doing, you can change your decision 10 times. Have at it.
Yeah.
So I felt bad for him just because, some people are trying to question whether or not he cheated or the validity of his victory. And, to all those people, just drop it. It's a non-issue.
Yep. I totally agree. I've never had the chance to kind of sit down and talk with Andrew, but I believe he's Reflex on Discord, if I remember correctly.
I believe that's correct.
I've talked to him, on there a fair amount, on and off. So from all that I can tell, he's a super nice guy, and obviously he's a really fantastic Destiny player. Anyone who made it that far has obviously proven they're really good at the game. So in my mind, anyone that was at that point 100% earned it, and it was a really well played final. So it was a joy to watch. It was a very cool final. So
super entertaining, and I didn't think a mill deck in the finals would be entertaining. But it was.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is now that Mills won, if you read Facebook or just some of the community posts, people are all worried about Mill being everywhere. And in all honesty, I enjoyed playing against this Mill deck the most because it's 100% fair.
Yeah.
Right? There's no hit and run into commando raid. There's no force speed into commando raid. You're not dealing with native 2 discard sides. It plays action by action. There's no action cheating. And in fact, the most threatening card in the deck, the Pod Racer, is something you can remove with a Vandalize, a Force Rend. And it's something you can take off the board without having to kill a character. And there's not a lot of decks where the biggest threat is just a support on its own. So I think there's a ton of interaction with it, and I really like playing against it. It's effective because it has a high health pool. It gets to draw from a lot of good cards, and that Pod Racer puts in some serious work. Yeah. But I think it's the least feel bad mill deck because you're not just going to lose your hand all at once.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's great for the community. As I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of people, and I hope this doesn't come off as arrogant or condescending. I think a lot of people focus too much on the damage aspect of the game, and they don't play the other parts, the discards, the disrupts. They don't play to control just the game space more so than damage. And I think this deck in particular will force people to build those habits and make people better players.
Yeah, I agree. It's there's a negative stigma that's always going around that's always gone along with mill, and I feel like it's mostly just because people aren't used to the gameplay. It's a different aspect of the game, but it's a part of the game. So I like that a deck like this exists because it'll help people learn that side of the game, get better at the game, and it's not a I'd much rather play against this deck all day than something like Pomaz that was just oppressive. There was nothing you could do, and all your characters are dead.
Right, and I get why people don't like Leia, why they don't like Cad Snoke decks, why they don't like Sabine decks, because at some point where you have multiple ways to do that action cheating and then you just discard 4, that does kind of feel bad and not interactive. But this mill deck that they came up with is so far from that I think it'll really strengthen the community base.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we have already gone a little bit longer than we usually do, and so I think it's about time to kind of wrap it up. Thank you so much for Jordan for joining us today. It's been really awesome just kind of sitting down and talking with you about your event and how you performed and your thought process going through the whole thing. It's been, I feel like, a really insightful episode. So thank you so much for joining us. Is there anyone you want to shout out or anything like that before we start wrapping things up?
Shout out to Andrew. It was a great finals match. Probably my favorite Destiny match ever. Shout out to the local guys that I think wanted me to win more than I did throughout the whole tournament, sending me messages. And then shout out specifically to one guy, Brian, that traveled with us. I don't know if it's on any of the video streams, but this man, he knew I hadn't eaten all day, and he stood for an hour or some odd minutes watching me play, holding a hot dog and a bottle of water. And I had no idea that the hot dog was for me. And so I just took the water, and he ended up throwing the hot dog away. He told me like a day later that hot dog was for me, and I felt so bad about it. But I just think that's a cool guy to have a friend there that's just going to look out for you. Yeah, absolutely. 8-10 hours of playing, whatever it was, and he's standing there with food and drink in hand. Kind of cheered me on. Awesome. So I thought that was really cool.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. That's about it for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in on Twitch, and if you're listening to the podcast on whatever media you consume it on. Before we wrap things up, I want to remind people again, if you like the show, do us a huge favor, leave us a review on iTunes. It really helps people find the show if they're looking for Star Wars Destiny content. And of course, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to be doing our giveaway drawing on Friday. So if you're interested in entering that, all you got to do is like our Facebook page, leave a review on either Facebook or iTunes, and we'll be doing the drawing for that on Friday. And other than that, be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central when we record our next episode. And until then, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having me, guys.
See you.
Yeah, man.